I always get asked because I work a lot in elementary schools.
Yeah, right.
Kids will ask me how I got so tall.
Do they come up to your
I used
knees?
to teach fourth grade, and I would tell kids all day long, in the hallways, I would say, "Oh, I always eat a lot of asparagus." And I actually got over the years 2 parents complaining to me, saying, "I hate asparagus. Why does my kid want it all the time?"
Well, if they've ever seen it come out of the ground in the spring, they know why.
All right, I am here to very briefly introduce MASI's own Chuck Brimmer. Chuck is our longtime, now former, retired, semi-retired, partly retired, we keep tricking him back into things, like this, editor of The Darter, has a lot of years, I won't say how many, I don't know how many actually. He's very experienced, he's a seasoned aquarist, particularly with live bears. But I was just talking how important it is to move from, if you just, keeping fish alive, once you've got that and you want to reproduce them and raise fry, you've got to be able to hatch brine shrimp. One of the challenges that you guys know about is that there's so much information and misinformation out there on the internet. And so to hear it from somebody that's done it for, what, 2-3 years?
Yeah, a couple, yeah.
Yeah, or 50, I don't know. Who's been successful, who's raised thousands of fry. Hatching brine shrimp, to get that from an expert is what we're here to do today. So take it away, Chuck.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I have been, my main focus has been always live bears and community tanks. And so every once in a while I'll get off into some of the egg layers and such as well. But in raising fry that you have in a community tank or in your home aquaria, as you progress from keeping a single tank onto maybe many tanks, like Steve and myself and several others have done in the Missouri Aquarium Society, you run across where you have young fry that you need to feed. And there, as you can see at the swap today, there are several types of live foods that are useful with varying success. Some very small ones to from some of the microworms up to grindle worms, even earthworms work in some situations. But one of the species that works perhaps the best overall across most fry are baby brine shrimp. And baby brine shrimp are very highly nutritious. They run 50% or higher in protein, and most of those are what we call HUFAs, or omega-3s, highly unsaturated fatty acids. Yeah, thanks, Matt. And so I'm going to speak a little bit today about, this is basically divided into 3 parts. We're going to build a brine shrimp hatchery. They're very easy to make, very cheap, very simple. Then we're going to start one up, the same one we built. And then we're going to come back and we're going to harvest this one. And essentially that's all you need to know as far as raising baby brine shrimp. Now, baby brine shrimp are a little bit large for some of the very tiniest tetra fry and some of the others, but for any of the even the very small live bear fry and many of the other species as well, they're just the right size. And the thing about baby brine shrimp that works is they move in the aquarium. So the triggered response is for the fry to chase them and catch them and eat them. Where if you're feeding even finely ground flakes or other fry foods, they may be small enough, but they don't have that movement response that you get from the baby brine shrimp. So, a lot of people take a look at baby brine shrimp or hatching baby brine shrimp, and they go online and they find perhaps a pound can of brine shrimp, and it's $60. And for some aquarists, that's fairly expensive. But if the way we're going to set it up today, that can, one harvest of baby brine shrimp a day will last almost a year. Suddenly, the daily cost has come very far down, okay? And we'll talk about that a little bit. So just so this thing isn't distracting right now, I am going to cover it up. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. What you need to build a brine shrimp hatchery is a 2-liter soda bottle. cheap ones work. A lot of the cheaper ones have a rounded end down here. I prefer the ones, say the Coke products or the others that have a more conical bottom on them, because the brine shrimp, when they fall to the bottom, they slide down in a little bit further, and they're easier to harvest and much cleaner to harvest. But you can use the others if you do. We'll talk about that when we get ready to harvest it. The other thing that you will need primarily is, I go to the Restore or Menards or somewhere and pick up a 4x4 square of ceramic tile. Then I take the cap for the bottle, and I use silicone seal. The expensive stuff is actually in your pet store. The cheaper stuff is at the hardware store. Make sure you get silicone one. It works the best. Put a glob on the center of the tile, press your lid to your 2-liter bottle on there, or any size, because most bottles will screw into that no matter what size they are. And let it set for at least 24 hours. So these have been done about 2 days ago to let the relatively thick silicone seal harden. And so after that's hardened, or while that's hardening, you can take a soda bottle, and I like to cut them right here above the major width, just above that, so that I'm then cutting this bottom off that has the dimples on it. The easiest way that I've found to do that is to start it with a sheetrock knife, and then use a pair of scissors. And now you can, particularly if you go in a clockwise direction, which is the way the scissors line up under the plastic, you can very easily cut that off, and usually you can meet at the end. Okay? Save this piece, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But now, to make the brine shrimp hatchery, and it's easier to cut that if you leave the top on, so you've got a little more rigidity. Take the bottom that has previously hardened, screw it on, and be a little careful, because sometimes you can twist the top right out of the silicone seal, particularly if it's not been hardening for 2 or 3 days, okay? That's essentially our brine shrimp hatchery. Some people make other types. If you don't want to go buy the tile, here's one Charles Harrison made just out of 2 Coke bottles. He cut one of them off and he uses the bottom of it. There are several reasons I like this as a preferable. This one is pretty easy to knock over. It rotates right off the bottom. This one is a lot more difficult to knock over. The other thing is, I like to hatch my baby brine shrimp at about 80 degrees. And that's the optimum hatching temperature. At 80 degrees in 24 hours, essentially 90 to 95% of the brine shrimp eggs that are in that hatchery will hatch. At lower temperatures, like room temperature, they will hatch, but it'll take longer, which means you'll have to leave it set up a little bit longer. We'll talk about that in a minute. So in order for mine to hatch at 80 degrees, I take a 10-gallon aquarium or a 5.5 or whatever, fill it with water and put a heater in it, and set that heater at 80 degrees. This now will set right in there. And I have now a water bath. And if you want to, you can put insulation around the tank so that it doesn't, the heat from the tank doesn't spread out. That would be the cheapest. So let's talk then a little bit about how to set that up. We've made it. You should be on page 2 of your handout. And so now let's set this up so that we can harvest the brine shrimp. There's a very simple recipe that I use, and some of this is necessary, some of it is just added, but it helps. I use sodium chloride. Now, a lot of people, if you're in an aquarius, you probably heard about marine salt, sea salt. A lot of people think that they need to have a sea salt. That's not necessary. You can use iodized, non-iodized, you can use table salt, you can use sea salt. The absolute cheapest, if you're going to be raising baby brine shrimp daily for a long period of time, the absolute cheapest is to find a farm and home store or a feed store. Go in and they sell salt in 50-pound bags for mixing in cattle rations. And up until recently, it was running $5 a bag for 50 pounds, okay? That'll last you much more than a year, all right? It may be up slightly, I have not checked recently. The next thing you want to use is Epsom salts. Epsom salts is magnesium sulfate, and it will have a tendency to add some of the nutrients back that sea salt would otherwise have, and you can buy a bag of Epsom salts at Walmart, many other places around very inexpensively, just a couple bucks a bag, or a pound. The other thing that will help buffer the pH in the hatchery, and you really don't need to use this and the next couple of things. They will hatch just fine without it, but if for some reason you want to try an experiment and grow the baby brine shrimp up to be adult brine shrimp, these would more mimic the sea or the highly alkaline saline salt that they would find, say, at the Great Salt Lake and other places. So is baking soda. And baking soda, it doesn't have to be nice baking soda. Go to your wife's kitchen, and she's probably got a box of it in the refrigerator she's using to absorb odor. Say, hey, this is probably old. Why don't you just replace it, and then you take the one that she had in there, all right? And, of course, brine shrimp eggs. The brine shrimp eggs come, in most cases, you can buy them on the internet. Right now, I checked this morning, and they're running $35 to $45 per pound, so the price is actually a little bit cheaper right now. And this would be a pound. The best way, since you're not going to use it for over a year, the best way to store that is to open it, take some out that you're going to use in a week or so, and then keep this in the freezer. Because that will keep metabolism down. It'll give you the longevity of the greatest longevity to the eggs that you buy, and the best results. The other thing that you can get brine shrimp at several different locations. One of the vendors out here I know is selling it. We'll talk a little bit more about some of those in a bit. Some of them act a little bit differently depending upon the source. Most of the brine shrimp eggs that you buy from, say, Brine Shrimp Direct or the U.S. Harvested brine shrimp eggs, the eggs will hatch. Well, initially the eggs will float. When they hatch, the shells and the nopuli will go down into the water column, and so the unhatched eggs are at the top. Okay. Some of the others are available for varying costs and various qualities. In some cases, the eggs will also sink, and in some of them, the nopuli do not separate from the water very well. But there are ways to get around that, so we'll talk about that in a minute. The other thing that I like to use is I just go down to the Dollar Tree or wherever, Walmart, and get a set of measuring spoons, okay? And then I measure those. If you notice, there's a recipe in the handout that shows for a 2-liter hatchery, a 1-liter hatchery, which would be exactly half that, and then a half-liter hatchery, which would be half that again. There's a recipe on how much salt, Epsom salt, eggs, baking soda, and bleach to use in that. And so I normally am starting a 2-liter hatchery, and one set of 4 measuring spoons works extremely well, which would be a tablespoon, a teaspoon, a half teaspoon, and a quarter teaspoon. It works out really well because each one of those then will go to one of the ingredients that you're going to put in the hatchery. Now, to start the hatchery, I start with water just out of the tap. Chlorinated is fine. In fact, if we're going to chlorinate it anyway. You can take a large pitcher and mark it at 1.5 liters, or it just so happens that if you've got one of these 2-liter Coke bottles, when you get right to past the restriction on the bottle, that's 1.5 liters. So you can mark it there if you want by pouring it in exactly, but all of our things are rough estimates anyway, just like nature. You know, it rained on a salt lake and suddenly it's a little bit less salty, or the sun will shine on it and it'll evaporate and the salt content goes up. We're looking for averages here, okay? So I now have and I save the other water when I start a new hatchery. We'll use that in a minute. So I now have a hatchery that's built and it's got the water in it. The other thing you need is an air source. If you've got a little air pump that sits there, this one is for ease of use here. It's cordless. I go down to Tropical World Pets or one of the pet shops and buy a section. You can usually buy it in 3-foot sections of rigid airline tubing. Okay, and this is a foot section, so out of a 3-foot piece, you can make 3 of these. So it should be, normally it's about $3 to $4 for the whole piece. Now we're talking about a little over $1. It's on an air pump, and just drop it in. Now you've got the air to the bottom. A lot of the methods of hatching brine shrimp will actually put the brine shrimp hatchery up on a cone stand, a ring stand, and then put the airline at the bottom. That's fine too, but for me, it's hard to put that in a water bath. So I opt for this, and it works extremely well. Then I take my measuring spoons, and I try to put my stuff in containers that I can open one-handed. And for the 1 tablespoon, 2 of those of salt will be the right salinity for that, for the brine shrimp to hatch. Okay? For the Epsom salts, it's the next largest, which would be 1 teaspoon. 1 teaspoon is what you need. For the baking soda, you would go all the way to the smallest one, which is 1/4 teaspoon. And it just so happens that a 1/4 teaspoon is what you need to set to buffer the pH. Okay? And then you're ready for the brine shrimp. Now, depending on how many you feed a day, you can actually hatch a few more in here than what would be optimum. I use the 1/2 teaspoon cup, or a measuring spoon, out of that set of 4. And 1 to 3, generally 1 will hatch very well. Sometimes I use 1.5 up to 2. There's 1.5. And set it aside. One comment on some of the other brine shrimp that you can buy, they seem to really like the oxygen. So if you hatch too many of them at one time, it drives the oxygen level down in the salt water anyway, and they have a tendency not to go to the bottom, as we'll show in a minute. But they can still be harvested, but it just takes a little more care. So now that is set up. The other thing I do that helps disinfect and start the hatchery is I take a little plastic container with a screw down top, because this has got bleach in it, and I just put a few drops of bleach in. Now, bleach is used to decapsulate brine shrimp eggs. If you're going to feed the eggs direct, it's not going to hurt them, and even though it is chlorinating the water, it's going to evaporate as this bubbles over the next 24 hours, right? And while the eggs are hatching. Then that other piece that I cut off, I just drop it on the top. The thing I found is that if you've got this bubbling vigorously enough, the air that's coming up will have a tendency to splash and throw those brine shrimp eggs out. But if I take the bottom of the 2 liter that I cut off and set it in there, it hits the bottom of it, it runs down to the points on it, and they fall back into the water. Okay, so that actually helps me save brine shrimp. And that sits there then for the next 24 hours. If I come back in 24 hours at this room temperature, they wouldn't quite be hatched, all of them. You can harvest it and then let it sit for another 24 hours and harvest it again, okay? Now, any questions on where we're at up to now? Let me make sure I've covered everything I wanted to cover. We got it started. Now we're going to harvest them, okay? Now, when I set this up over here a while ago and I hid this, what I was actually doing was there's the way that looks running. What I was actually doing was when you come in to harvest your brine shrimp, turn off the light, take the air out of it, and let it sit, cover it up so that there's no light getting in. And what you'll find is that the brine shrimp will fall to the bottom. Now I take a regular measuring cup and add a little bit of water to it. This is fresh water. And, sorry, Matt, that I'm moving out of your way. Now, I use a turkey baster, pretty cheap. They used to be selling for $1 at Dollar Tree. They quit ordering them in. I think they're a little higher than that now, but you get them for about $2 now. And the other thing that I like to use, some people will use brine shrimp nets, baby brine shrimp nets. Those are getting very hard to find. And they're very difficult to clean and take care of. And so actually something that I've found works just as well, if not better, is a K-cup, stainless steel K-cup. And I found that most stores do not carry those. You almost have to order them, but they're about $1 a piece. And they'll last almost forever. Now, when I get ready to harvest my brine shrimp, I take the piece that's been on top and put my, set it on the counter or the table and put the K-cup in it. I can take the baster, go all the way to the bottom. See when I drew it up? That's the baby brine shrimp and the hatched eggs that went to the bottom. The unhatched ones are still at the top, and this was in an 80-degree bath for almost 24 hours, so it's very highly hatched. And I found that baster is almost exactly the right amount of material to fit inside that K-cup with one squeeze. So you can then let it sit and let the water drain out of it into the top of the hatchery that you cut off until it's down. And now, if for some reason your baby brine shrimp did not go to the bottom, maybe it's one of the types from another source that sometimes doesn't, the other method you can use is use a pipette, say one just like what we put in here for the air, drop it to the bottom, and then siphon out any of the salt water all the way up until you just leave the unhatched stuff at the top, okay? And run that through a brine shrimp net, or it'd be a little more difficult, but you could run it through one of the K-cup, stainless steel K-cups. Once the K-cup has drained most of the salt water out, you just take the salt water and your K-cup. This is discard. And they're in fresh water now. Here's your baby brine shrimp ready to feed. You're probably going to add some water, or because this will feed Depending on how many new fry you have in a tank, this will feed 15, 20 tanks. Now, if you feed what you think is necessary, and you can feed them a couple times a day, the excess, just set it in the refrigerator. And it'll stay there. They will not hatch any, they will not die on you, and they won't molt, which is important because the baby brine shrimp, when they first hatch, they are at their highest nutritional level. If you look at the picture on the front of that handout that you have, you'll see one shrimp on there that is a lighter colored. That shrimp has gone through the first molt. All of that dark stuff that you see in the other shrimp is highly unsaturated fatty acids. What's left in the one that's gone through its first molt is essentially nothing. So if they go through that first molt, they're still going to be 37 to 40% protein, but the nutritional value has dropped considerably. And they have just now begun to eat, so if you want to bring the nutritional value back up, now you're going to have to feed them to load the baby brine shrimp. So you want to keep them cool so that they don't hatch any further, and just use your baster to feed into the tank. You can, I know Aquarius have done this, the nutrition is there, take an ice cube tray and fill the ice cube tray and set it in the freezer. Now you've got ice cubes of baby brine shrimp that you can feed almost any time you need it. Just take a couple out, toss it in the tank, and the shrimp will, or excuse me, the species will eat it. I use this for some of the smaller livebearers, such as four-spotted merry-widow, Nestron decimaculata, some of the others that have the very tiny fry that really have trouble taking any of the flake food that is offered to them. And particularly on many of the other larger species of fish, their fries, they work directly. Otherwise, you may have to start a little bit on some of the smallest ones with microworms for a day or two. Are there any questions?
We need to put the heater for maintain the 80 degrees
What's that? I'm sorry.
pressure. Put the temperature on.
Temperature.
How do you
Oh, the temperature?
Yeah.
Room temperature, if you have it at room temperature, which is say 70 to 75, harvest it at 24 hours, then set it back up, and come back and harvest it again 24 hours later to get the rest.
So the temperature will be pretty low there. So that's the reason I'm asking.
I use a 10-gallon tank or a 5.5, fill it with water, and put a heater in it that is set at 80 degrees. There's a bunch of them used out here today, and so I set it at 80 degrees. So once I set this in it, which is why I use the square of ceramic tile, it's weight. It takes it to the bottom. It gives it stability, and it'll be at 80 degrees that you're hatching, which is your optimum temperature. Okay. Okie doke. If anybody, I will pour this. I've got a couple of extra bottles up here. I will take these and pour them into some bottles if somebody wants to take them home. This one, remember, is hatched. These are. And this one, if you run air in it, it'll be hatched in 24 hours.
Thank you, John.
Yep.
While we're talking, or do you need a laptop? I got the laptop, it's down here. I left it set Dennis used his own laptop earlier.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. You bet.
Just 1 minute to change over.
Yeah, it may take them. We'll see. I knew I was going to make a mess. That's why I got the towel under it.
Oh, okay, I was using it to keep people slightly less. Oh, I was wondering what that was. I'm like, man, Jerry keeps some of stuff in this office building.
I use these for,
I saw it down there. and I
they
thought,
get algae and
Where
stuff
do
all
I
over.
buy this?
You go online. It's Brine Shrimp Direct, but they sell through Amazon as well. So that's probably the easiest.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Give me that one of Charles's.
all right, I'm going to go ahead and start introducing Bob Watson here. Bob is one of the key organizers of the events this weekend. He is a longtime MASI member, longer than me. I think. I don't know how long anybody's been here. I've been here 5 years, a long time for Bob. Bob has a lot of expertise, a lot of years of experience setting up outdoor tub ponds. It's a great thing to do during the summer. Lots of opportunities there. I'm hoping to flower some sword plants and breed some fish myself this summer in mine. But there are all kinds of little issues that can come up. This amount of sun it gets, mosquito larvae, something I've found recently that came early this year. I don't have fish out of the ponds yet. I will say in my own experience, fewer mosquitoes when you have ponds of fish.
Yes.
Mosquitoes come, they lay their eggs, fish have a great meal, no mosquitoes. Like before I had ponds, we had worse mosquito problems.
Yes.
But when you don't have fish in the ponds, then you run into trouble. Anyway, Bob's going to tell you all about doing that.
Okay.
Exciting aspect of the hobby.
First thing, you don't have to have anything fancy. I know a guy right now that's putting a canoe in his front yard and raising fish in it and landscaping it. And this is one of my tubs. This is about as small as I use, just because it's a plastic barrel. You cut it in half, seal the top with silicone, and you have two. You watch when they're pulling their docks out in the fall, they'll almost give you these. So they're cheap. If you go to the farm store, these are about 30 bucks. The other thing that's really, really important is you got to pay attention to who's in the neighborhood. You know, if you got little kids in the neighborhood, you really need to pay attention, because if you got fish in here and they find out, they're going to want to come see, and it could turn out pretty bad. So that's something you need to consider. The other thing I always do is I put milk crates in mine for a couple of reasons. That gets covered with algae. So there's all kinds of stuff that grows in there that the fish like. So you could actually, you really don't even have to feed them that much, because all the stuff they're getting. And then like Steve said, the mosquitoes, they come, they lay in. You'd be surprised how many mosquitoes have come to this water. We have them at our house, and I put them on our patio. We have a creek. You used to never be able to even sit out there. I put about a dozen of these around with live bears in them, or not a lot of fish, because you're doing a tub, so there's I don't do no filtration, no nothing. Just put the fish in it and let them go. So you can't put a ton of fish, but you can put several pairs. And just by doing that, our whole back porch and yard area, you can sit out there and very seldom you ever get it bit by a mosquito. You can sit and watch, and I've sat and watched mosquitoes come and land on the water, and the fish just suck them in. And I'm serious. You could also thing you can do is like set a potted plant on this. Then you don't even have to water it, and it's pulling nutrients. You could decorate it a little bit, make it look nice. But for me, I just put them big bread trays. I got a buddy that has a restaurant, and they always have them. They don't pick them up. They get cracked or broke, and they won't take them. So I get them. They're free. And they fit perfectly over here, and I put a blocker on it or another plant or something, just so the kids can't get in. So first thing, always safety. Remember, if there's little kids and they know there's fish in there, they're going to come over and explore. And you don't want them to get carried away there. Fish, that's the other thing. You got to think about your fish. This time of the year, it's cool, so you could do cool water fish like white clouds or any of the cyprinids, godiids. A lot of the godiids would go do well in there. Later in the season, you can do hot water fish like cichlids. You could put a pair of cichlids in here, or you may have a ton of fry in the fall. And this stuff you consider before you do this, because if you put them out there in the sun, they're going to get hot. When it gets hot out, that water's going to be hot. But you put them in the shade, they'll be in the shade, and it'll be cooler. So you got to think about that stuff and plants. I've raised tons of plants. Like I have big tubs too. I get them chemical totes and I cut them in half, because I got a place we can go get them for 25 bucks. I mean, how much cheaper does it get than that? 200-gallon tubs for 25 bucks. I cut them, and see, I ain't perfect. They don't have to be perfect. It's just a basic, it's a tub, and you can use that trash can as an outdoor tub if you really wanted to. Throw a couple goldfish in it, keep the water changed, you'll be fine. Location. Let's see, I gotta keep my notes because I'm not as sophisticated as the other guys with all their fancy stuff. Predators. The other thing you got raccoons. Everybody knows we got raccoons and they love fish. There's a lot of other things that you can get in these tubs. When you bring your fish in, you need to worm them with some type of wormer or parasite guard because the birds are flying around, dropping stuff in there and other critters coming in and out. So when you bring your fish in, they could have parasites or some worms or something. And there you get online like Aquabid and stuff, there's guys that sell that stuff. You buy a pack of it like this for 30 bucks and it'll last you a lifetime because you just do a little bitty bits of it. Let's see, where else? The other thing you got to think about is the other kind of predators, like snakes. We live next to a creek, and I've seen I don't know how many snakes sitting on the bank, and they see the fish moving, slowly move in there, go underwater, grab a fish, and then roll up on the bank and sit there and eat the minnows. Well, they'll do the same thing here. So that's something else to think about. Frogs are terrible. They get in there, there'll be a jillion tadpoles, so you kind of got to watch the frogs, try to keep them out, and then bugs. Mosquitoes are great because, like I said, they're continuous supply of food. Dragonflies are not. If dragonflies lay in here, you will not have any fry. They will all be eaten. And you've all seen dragonflies, their eyes, how they're that greenish iridescent color. The larvae in here will have those same eyes. And if you see those, there's not going to be any fry because they are nasty predators. They eat everything. And they'll even get into the small fish. As they get bigger, they'll get the smaller fish too. Not just the fry, just even small fish. Let's see. The other thing you got to watch is kids with people doing, like we live in town, and I have several tubs, and I've had people help me with my fish. Well, that tank had stuff in it, so I put some stuff in it to get rid of it for you. Guess what happened? I had a 250-gallon chemical tote, a half of it, full of Scyphia francesca, which is a godiad. There's like 200 of them in there. The next day, they were all dead. Every single one of them. So, please don't do that. Rain off the roofs. Summertime especially, you got a factory over here, belching smoke, whatever, putting stuff in the air. Even around here, the water off the roofs, you need to check it. Because even that'll kill your tank, kill whatever's in there. Whatever the stuff's in the air, I don't use rainwater off the buildings. Try to catch it like in a tub away from the building where you're not getting all that runoff. That's a bad thing. I don't really have a whole lot more, but like I said, a tub is a tub, and it can be a bathtub. Like I said, I know Ben out here is doing Ben right there. He's doing a canoe in his yard. And the other thing is, if you got a lot of small tanks, if you really want to and think about it, you can take these tubs and set them up outside. Take your aquariums that are inside, set them up in these tubs, because you don't have to have an air pump if you not heavily stocked, and not have to do a whole lot all summer. So then you ain't got the daily water change or weekly water changes and stuff. Grow tubs, I do live bears and grow tubs all the time. Put a big tub out there, throw some milk crates in it or something, just so that some algae or stuff can grow and they got places to hide, because all fish love places to hide. And then just feed them, and then in the fall, you be ready. That's the other thing. If you take a big tub outside and they spawn and you got 250 babies in this tub, you got to plan on what you're going to do with them. Because we have a fall auction, but there's not room for 250 fry. So that's the other thing that's kind of important, is pay attention to what you're going to do with all these fish. Because there's no point in going through all the work of raising them if you're just going to, what do I do with them? Put them in tanks, and it's overwhelming sometimes. So, and covers. You can eat, like if we get, your tubs are full, you can get plastic sheets and even the pieces of old plywood put over them to partially shade them for sun and keep the water off. This one, if you see, I got a notch in it here. It's just a notch right here. I took my Sawzall, just cut down 1 inch. This tub, that way the water, it won't overflow, because if you get a lot of rain, they will overflow. And some of your fish, like guppies, you know, they're used to you coming up and feeding them. And the water's active. So they're thinking, well, oh, look, the guy's coming to give us food again. Well, it's raining, and all of a sudden they're out all over the patio or the yard. That's not a good idea, good either. So I always try to put a notch or some type of, so that something to keep them from overflowing. I know guys that take and drill holes in them and fashion screens and all that stuff, but you really don't have to. You know, I mean, how many times a year are we going to get a rain where it's going to downpour enough to actually overload this where it's going over the side if you got a little bit of a notch in it? Doesn't happen very often. It's really all I got. I didn't have a lot of time to prepare. Yes?
With that crate, does that help, I always had trouble when I did this, raccoons, and I would put covers at night and everything. But that's a good idea, because then they would have had a hiding place.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any fish if I had plants, it would tear up the plants, whatever. That's
Yeah.
a good idea.
The raccoon, this is floating, and the fish are in there, and the raccoons are hitting it, and it hurts their hands. So they don't like it.
The egg crate floats?
Yeah, it's plastic.
Okay, so that'll float.
Yeah, it's just, and these are everywhere. I mean,
Yeah, I breed goldfish and guppies and different buzzards in here.
but I always set my tubs up a couple weeks before I'm going to take fish out. This will be covered with green stuff, and the tub will be full of mosquito larvae and bugs. And
But you never filter.
No.
It's always rain.
nope, I don't filter.
It's a fish type, pond type one.
Yeah.
So you don't,
No, if you put 3 or 4 fish pairs in there, you're not going to.
I have.
How do you
Yeah.
keep from getting green water?
If they're sitting out in the sun, if they start to turn real too green, I put a piece of plywood or a piece of board or something over them just to shade them.
Okay.
You can buy stuff to, I used to buy stuff that's short that takes the algae out. But I didn't
Yeah.
have to use it a lot. I made sure it only didn't have sun all day. Something was part sun.
Yeah.
Shade.
And now in the midsummer, the tubs out in the sun get too hot. And I try to cover that, but it seems like the guppies can go all the way up to 100 degrees. I've got them up there. I tested the water, I'm like, these guys should be baking.
Well, the temperature here is 100 if it's a floating, but it ain't down there.
So in the bottom, it does stay cool. There's no way to measure it, I mean, but so I'm just supposed to.
Yeah. Well, they make the thermometers with the long wire on them that goes to,
I never was able to.
yeah, they're like $6
So
or
so
something.
even though I'm testing up top, it's 100, it's probably a lot less than the bottom.
Well, yeah, because the bottom of that tub is sitting on concrete or the ground. Almost any time you can touch the ground and it's way cooler. So,
I was reading that that's one reason why you don't want to have filtration and have water being moved around, because when it gets hot, the fish can go to the bottom where it's cool.
yeah,
And if you're moving it around, then
right.
you won't have as many like cooler spots for it.
That's right. But
Would it be worth putting like, 2 bys or something under it, like setting it on something, or the pavement would?
well, if you set it up like that, then air is going to get under there, and then it's going to get hotter. Yes.
Do you ever overwinter any of your tubs? Because I've kept like rice fish and I've overwintered them before. I'm not sure if you do that with any of your fish.
I do not. I have a friend that does the local Gambusio, and he has a 250-gallon horse tank, plastic. He puts an air filter in there and a heater.
Does it freeze solid? Mine freezes.
Well, he has an air stone in that.
You don't have to run a heater.
He does.
He does run a heater.
He does. I don't.
Whoever said that, in fact, you run a heater. You run a heater.
I do heaters at times. If I go out early in the spring, I'll put heaters in and then late in the fall, or in the fall I put them out if I don't have time to get them in. It's like I said, you put a couple pairs of guppies in here, and then all of a sudden you start tearing it apart in the fall, and it's like, oh, I got 150 fish. What am I going to do with them? Yeah, you might want to put a heater in there until you figure it out.
How cold does it get when you say, oh, I need to put a heater in? Do you know?
If it's starting to getting 50, 60 at night, yeah, I kind of put a heater in if I can.
They died. There's only 6 of them ever do that. Bob, do you put any aquarium plants in there, or you used to put
Yeah.
potted plant on there?
Yeah, I've took and put like my bigger tubs, the chemical totes. 2 years ago, I took clumps of Java moss and threw in all of them, and that fall, I could have filled this tub full of Java moss.
Like we've got that string algae out by us. Does it attack your? It does. So it does.
Yeah, if
There's
it,
no pulling them into aquariums and having them look pretty. They did their job outside, but they use this after that.
yeah, that hair algae stuff, it gets in there.
Barley bales.
Barley bales takes care of it. I'll try that.
In larger size ponds, I don't know
Well-
how much you use, but on smaller, but in our large pond, we use barley bales.
Yeah,
You know, if you just take a chunk of that and put it in there.
yeah, you could try it. You could actually just put some in here.
Yeah.
You're going to put it in and let it float, so it would. But yeah, algae's always, the hair algae, if you have plants, it always seems like it goes all over. Even if you put covers on them, it seems like it doesn't.
Oh,
But
okay, that's just because you're just looking at the plywood across the top, and we've never done that, so that's something
They're
this
bigger,
year.
they're bigger tanks, so we're not even shade them, look at that hot.
They're
Yeah.
not in the middle of the yard, you know, they're not in your shade, so.
yeah, well, most of mine were under a lean-to. I had a 12 by 40 lean-to on the side of my building, and I had it concreted. Actually, I did it, and then that's where I kept my tubs. The problem is they didn't get enough sun, so I didn't get no algae grow at all. I got all the mosquitoes, but no algae, and so then I started going out behind the garage, actually the workshop, and it gets partial sun.
Gotcha.
And then, so partial sun works, yes.
What do you suggest using to clean out the barrels?
Clean out the barrel,
Yes,
like this.
yes.
I just,
Like when you first bring it home, what do you suggest using to clean it out?
what I do is I cut them,
Soap.
yeah. I pay attention to what you're getting first. Some of that stuff you'll never get out of them. It soaks into the, but at the gutter on the side of my shed, I take it loose and I stick them under there. And every time it rains, I would take a brush and swirl it around and dump it out and keep doing that 3 or 4 times. And then they're usually pretty good. And then I'll put like start with dither fish. Something that if it doesn't make it, some goldfish or some whatever you got that you're calling dither fish. Put them in there for a few days. If they make it, then you're good. Especially the big chemical totes. Because there's tags on them, but I don't trust them. You know, they say I always look for the ones that says safe for human consumption. Yeah, food grade ones. But so I still cut them in half or cut the top off, depending on what I'm doing with them. But I still wash them 3 or 4 times, and well, I don't wash them. Let the gutter run in there, because you know you start washing a 500-gallon tote out, it gets into some water. But if you put a gutter in there and let the gutter, every time it rains, it just keeps washing it out. And that's, if you're ever in a chemical situation, like I was in an engineering office for a while, the solution to pollution is dilution. And that was always the solution when we had air quality in the foundry, was to add a fan or some type of system to move air, to dissipate the molecules so you would have safer. And that's what the water does with as the gutters. But I only get like the food grade stuff. Because you know, you don't know what some of that other stuff is. I mean, they got description this long, and it's got it take you a lifetime to figure that all out, so.
So somebody told me once that mosquitoes actually cause that Calamanus.
Call what?
The Calamanus one, I think it's called
An internal
Calamanus.
parasite.
It could, I mean,
Mosquitoes cause them? Because I
I-
always use Lamisol, like even in my tubs, like once a month I'll throw, at night I'll throw the Lamisol in there.
I
'Cause
don't know.
I've had that.
I-
Do mosquitoes cause that or?
I haven't heard, but it wouldn't surprise me. You know, but it could be birds coming in, dropping parasites in there. It could be the snake that I was talking about that, you know, it could be anything. If you're putting something in an environment that's we don't know about. You know, it's not our house, so we don't know. It's just whatever's in the, you know, bugs and birds and critters are picking up here or there. So, you know, it's hard telling where they're getting those parasites.
I would say the other thing I've been trying to figure out is like I've got the big Rubbermaid tubs
Mhm.
with the big lid. Trying to figure out something to hang on there to make like a bog filter. So I
Make a
put it in
what?
my bog filter.
A
So
bog
put it in,
filter?
You know, like your plants that need just short,
Mhm.
your sides are this tall, and you like they can't be any deeper than this. Like something to hang on the side.
Take a regular pot and turn it upside down on the bottom, set them on
Yeah,
top.
or even like that.
This-
Just keep that in there.
Yeah, I just use cinder blocks for those last
Yeah,
year.
and then the fish can get in and grab it.
Yeah, these work for multiple things. And you could get two of these and cut one of them off and set it in the middle, and then your bog plants could sit in the middle.
Okay.
Because they,
My brain.
huh?
You said like watch out for dragonflies and watch out for, is there any way to prevent that?
I keep my water down low,
Right?
and then I have, like I said, the bread trays, because I get them cheap. I just get
When you
them.
say bread trays, is that just like a lattice plastic? Is that what you're talking about?
They're, if you go to the stores, when they bring in the bread, they're on these big trays.
Right.
The loaves of bread, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I have a friend that has a restaurant, and they get tons of them, and they won't pick them up. He's like, come get these.
And then you just lay that over the top.
Yeah, they'll fit. You may have to move it a little bit to make it perfectly, but they'll fit right over there, and they're kind of snug. And then I put hardware cloth, you know, the 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch over the top. And I maybe have 1 or 2 tubs throughout the whole year, the whole season, that will have dragonflies in it. But, you know, I probably, last year I had about 12, 14 tubs. The year before was over 20, because I got a tub here that holds 200 gallons. Why not put my fish in it and not have them have to deal with them in the basement, or grow out tubs? And, you know, you can take a grow out tub and put fry in it, because we're trying to raise fish in a tank like this. Okay, they're used, if you look at any native fish in the wild, they're not in a little tank. So if the bigger aquarium or bigger tub you put them in, the faster they're going to grow. They're going to grow to that size quicker. So that's why I use the big.
Place to grow the plecos
Huh?
at. Breed plecos, it's perfect to breed
Yeah.
them out.
Yeah, when they get all,
Yeah, you get that thick algae on the side and they just.
and the little fish and fry just love all that stuff. They get in there. There's all kinds of little things growing in there that you can't see, that them little fish are just eating and eating and eating. So
Water changes in your tubs?
not very often.
No?
If we go a long spell where it's dry, I'll drain some down and put some fresh water in. But
So last year, I put one tub out.
Mhm.
It was about 40 gallons. I put 8 guppies in there and ended up with 260.
yeah,
But the tub, by middle of July, the water was awful green.
yeah.
Is that normal?
Well, it's just stagnant water, but yeah, it's getting a lot of sun, and you know, if you don't get
No, I have it in almost total shade. It gets about an hour of sun in the morning, and the rest of the day, the house shades it, and it's in shade.
But, you know, it's same as a tank, you know, you get a bunch of nitrates in there. You may have to get some of that detritus and stuff out of the bottom, or because that's what's making it the green. Sunlight and yeah.
I
So
have that on it. I have that on it, and I have guppy grass in there, you know.
How'd the guppy grass do?
It did, I mean, almost filled the tub up,
Yeah,
you know, our path filled it up.
maybe been getting too much nitrogen and stuff out of the detritus, you know, and also all the other bugs dropping in there. You don't know how many bugs
Right, right.
and those fish are getting and going through their systems. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it ain't gonna hurt to do a water change. Doing water changes outside is easy. You just
Yeah.
stir it up and dip it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could sit right next to it all day long and not see a mosquito, not get a bite, nothing. And I also got a 5,000 gallon koi pond in my backyard.
Oh,
That don't have no mosquitoes either.
I would just say too, depending on what fish you have, the fry, honestly, a lot of fry like to be water too.
Yeah.
So you don't want it too overgrown, but a lot of them they fry off of having that, especially if they're small.
A lot of your smaller fish will do a lot better with green water because they do nip at that. A lot of your live bears like green stuff, and you'll notice in your tubs that the manure is got a greeny tint to it, and it's because they're picking at the algae and things.
You know what else also multiplies is the snails.
Yes. I never had snails in my whole, I at one time I had 80 tanks until last year. Now I'm down to 40. And I never had snails until I started doing outdoor tubs. Now they're everywhere.
Can't get rid of them.
No. I smash snails every morning. I see them. I don't know how many times I've had cut fingers and thumbs from the snails. So.
I got about 1,000 assassins and I couldn't put them in.
You should have brought them in. They're selling for $2 a piece now. So if you had 1,000, that's $2,000. We could have went on another Branson trip. Okay, anybody got anything else? Okay, I hope I helped you out.
Just checking. I ask every speaker the same question.
Fair enough.
Your speaker said no, and actually we are not raising up the cords. We're not. You're thinking of fish room. You're trying to keep it out of
Sorry?
water. You're trying to
I'll just hang out here up front.
That's why I
Yeah.
borrowed your crate.
No, it's fine. I just
Just a warning.
whatever you need to do, buddy. I'm always there to help.
Well, in the fish room, I'm always raising cords up off the ground. Right?
Yeah.
Snails come from the,
1 minute. Let's start. We'll let people have their right to master. Stepping away. I'm supposed to step over and take over your booth for a few minutes.
Yeah, if you just hang out with Micah, if you don't mind.
Let Micah come in here so we can finally worry about the airplanes. So this is no pressure.
Just Dennis Wong, no big deal.
No pressure. This was presented on plants in front of Dennis Wong.
Yeah.
He just, spent part of his talk with DK and some of the other top hobbyists. And,
Yeah.
Not necessarily always directly, but
Yeah, no big deal. No big deal. Yeah, no pressure.
He's talking for the doctors with the Mayo.
Yeah, it's fine. Well, the Mayo Clinic is not.
Even appreciate the Mayo joke, huh?
So the thing about Mayo Clinic is though they just.
How can they not have sriracha mayo? Melanie!
I.
How can they not have
Hey,
hug real quick.
horseradish mayo?
I would. I would.
Clinic, their food service
Yeah,
is-
I would. I would definitely have like 150 different.
Huh?
Did you get to meet Dennis Wong?
No, not yet.
He's right there
Let me introduce you.
in the blue shirt.
I'll introduce you and we'll interrupt Andre during his talk.
I forgot I had a hiking date with one of my friends from work, but I was there, and so then I was like, okay, I'll go hike.
We are now ready for our talk on beginner plants. No pressure. I was just telling Andre we've got Dennis Wong in the room, but no pressure. Andre has relatively recently joined MASI. He came over from the dark side, the saltwater hobby. No, it's all the same. I do both. But he actually was a prolific seahorse breeder before something about aquarium plants caught his attention. And currently he has what? 2 species of plants? No, 500?
500. Yeah.
500 species of plants. Just has 50 some here, so.
Yeah, I have 52 plants for sale over there.
52 species.
52 species, or varieties at the very least.
I've spent some time in his fish room. He has some very high-tech setups, but also some absolutely the lowest low-tech you can imagine setups. And he's going to share some of the secrets of his green thumbs.
So I'm going to do the exact opposite of what Dennis Wong did. He told you how to grow the tough stuff. I'm going to talk about the easy stuff, how to get started, how to begin in the process. And Steve's not kidding when he says I'm intimidated, because if we had a post online of Dennis Wong aquascaping a maple bonsai underwater, I would not expect that to be an April Fool's joke. I would have just figured he figured out how to grow a maple underwater. And so I'm looking. That's my challenge to you. I expect a maple by 2027 grown underwater. So the question I get asked all the time: why plants? Why do you want to do plants as opposed to just a hardscape only tank? As Steve said, I came from a saltwater side of the hobby, and one of the things that's different about saltwater and freshwater is that in saltwater, there's a lot more emphasis placed on the microbiome and the diversity that we see in our tanks. And that comes from the fact that in the old days, you would literally get a box of rock and sand from Fiji or from Indonesia or all these different places that would just be loaded with microbial and microscopic life that would just fundamentally transformed the aquarium, right? It created a world that was much more diverse, and that it just did everything it needed. I didn't even keep sponge filters. I just had air stones, just for a little bit of circulation. So when I came back to I left the saltwater hobby, and because I was disillusioned with the fact that I had bred tens of thousands of seahorses, and at this point I think about maybe 5 of them survived more than 4 weeks outside of my aquarium, and so I just didn't want to do that anymore, and I decided I was going to do. But what brought me back into the aquarium hobby was the fact that, like, right before I left saltwater, I read Diana Wallstead's book about the ecology of the planted aquarium, right? And like, if you look at my aquariums, I do almost nothing of the way she does things, but it was the first time that somebody actually introduced limnology into aquariums. It was the idea of actually understanding the biological processes, the ecological nutrient cycling, and it really changed how I wanted to keep tanks, but I got out, and then years later when I came back to the planted side as a result of that. But I now keep tanks. Most of my tanks are much closer to the way Dennis keeps his tanks, as a very high density tanks, very minimal hardscape. I was joking with him that in many of my tanks, the fish have to crawl through plants. They don't actually get a chance to swim. But the reason that I keep plants is because that is the way you introduce diversity into your tanks. So the plants themselves introduce diversity, but there are also things that come along with the plants, right? So plants, as Dennis was talking about, shed a lot of compounds. You need actually a pretty good biological filter for plants, because even if you think of the nitrogen cycle, they don't produce ammonia, they consume ammonia, but they shed carbon, they shed proteins, they shed fats and lipids. And so as a result, that's how you get that biofilm, and you can get very nasty water without a single fish, because they shed a lot of carbon into the water. But as a result of having plants, you end up with a much more diverse and more structurally capable ecosystem. And they will also, when you let's say you get a plant from my aquarium, they come with bacteria and copepods and all of these different things that exist in my diverse aquariums, also from the farms in Florida, and they bring all of these things into your aquarium that I think end up making the fish keeping easier. And I think that's kind of the central point of my talk, is that live plants are easier than fake plants, right? So now, if you're going to do Hygrophila chai in Rotala, Florida, no, they're not easier than fake plants. But a fake plant, in addition to just looking ugly, but that's a subjective thing, right, is not algae repellent. A healthy plant repels algae. And then the thing that people tell me on top of that is, well, I don't want to buy an expensive light. There are species of plants that have increased their size in my aquariums without a light. So the ones that are a great candidate for that are some of the more common Anubias. Anubias non-petite, some of the common mosses, hornworts, Iridensa, which is often called anacharis, but it's not really the true anacharis. They are so capable of growing in nutrient and light-starved conditions that they really are very hard to kill. The only way I've ever succeeded in killing those plants is in keeping them in a high-tech Dennis Wong style tank, right? Because you blast them with really high light, they have no roots, as he talked about earlier today, the nutrients are almost all in the soil, they don't have roots, and so they're being hit by all of this light, trying to grow so they don't make it, right? So that's the place where it would be really hard to grow them. But you toss a sprig this big of hornwort into a fry tank that is just loaded with nutrients, and you will have buckets of hornwort by the end of the month, right? And so really the biggest thing about being good with plants is exactly what Dennis was talking about. It's picking the right plant for the right job. The hardest thing that people struggle with is when they want to have that high-tech tank and they have these 3 or 4 really hard to keep plants, but on top of that, they're responsible. I'm going to toss in some Ludwigia repens. And then Ludwigia repens doubles in size every 36 hours. And you literally just have a tank full of Ludwigia repens that is just like one big brick you can lift it up as one big mass, right? The biggest mistake I ever made was putting Java moss into a high-tech tank. Java moss is a weed that you cannot get out. I will trade duckweed for Java moss any day of the week. I have a tank where Java moss is growing out of my silicone. It has grown into the silicone of my tank, and every time I rip it out, there's little pieces that are left behind, and it goes right back out. So really, a lot of it is just about choosing what you want. Same thing, and you'll see this sometimes be represented online, with when people describe plants that are easy and everybody goes, well, I killed that. Java fern is a great example. You toss a Java fern into a nutrient-starved tank with high light, it will not do well, right? But you take Java fern and you put it into one of our more classic tanks, right? Gravel with some poop on the bottom, or especially some like an under gravel filter with low to medium light, and it'll just grow and multiply and get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So it's really about choosing what plant fits into the tank that you want to keep. And as Steve pointed out, I have everything from tanks, and I will do this tonight just because of Dennis's comment about how you'll be scared of how much CO2 we put in. I'll take a video of one of my CO2 canisters going in my 200 gallon. You literally can't see the bubbles. It's just like one column of CO2 leaving the thing. And I go through a tank of CO2 about every 6 weeks, a 20-pound CO2 tank, right? But that's because I want to grow plants really fast, and it's a 200-gallon tank. And I've been doing for years the same thing that Dennis does, which is I have high off-gassing. It has a sump that has very high surface area as a result of the water coming down, and so it gets a lot of CO2. I do not put Java moss in that tank, because if I put Java moss in that tank, it will take over, right? So it's really about matching those plants. And so we really have to, the best way to do well with plants, start thinking about them almost the way we think about fish, right? Nobody puts a guppy and a convex cichlid together. Well, a lot of us have in the past. It's ended badly for the guppy, right? And so you don't want to with a very slow, demure, demanding plant, right? So it's about mixing and matching things appropriately. So I think that really is, for me, the biggest lesson that is, quote unquote, the green thumb. The other thing that has been really helpful is to understand the concept of transition and the concept of growth as behavior, right? So we do things to impact our environment and to change our environment so that so the environment suits us better. Plants do that too, they just can't move unless they're carnivorous plants and then get to snap, right? But really, for the most part, they don't move. What do? They grow. They grow towards things, they grow along things, and they grow away from things, but they also change the structure of their body to suit the new environment, right? And the classic thing that we talk about is the immersed to submerged transitions, but there's tons of those transitions, right? The only time I have ever killed a nubius, like the classic nubius, is when I put them in a fresh tank. The tank that has just been planted and filled 12 hours ago, right? They will, I would say half the time they will die, right? And why is that? Because none of the biological processes are functioning, none of the ecosystem is developed, so the nitrates are going up, and then they're going down, and then the biofilms explode and they cover it, and then the diatoms explode because you have this huge amount of surface area and you don't have any of the microbes that normally eat the diatoms, and so they just shade it out. And the anubias, which is a slow-growing plant, is put into this new environment, and their first response is, okay, so now I have to try to adjust to this environment. And then within 3 days, the environment changes. And they say, oh, I'm going to adjust to this environment, and then this, and then this. And in the process of going back and forth, it consumes all of its energy and dies. That's really how people tend to lose a lot of the aeroids, especially anubias or bucephalandra. I don't put Boost in a new tank. If I get an expensive Boost, that sucker is going into a 2-year-old tank. The older the better, the more stable the better. But there is a trick that you can use. And this is the closest I will ever get, well, this is the only time I will actually recommend a specific product. Seachem Flourish Advance. So Seachem line of products are terribly named, but the advanced part, it's not actually a fertilizer. It's a phytohormone. It's actually an auxin. It stimulates the growth of roots. And so what it's really wonderful for, and I don't know if Matt's here, not you, Matt, the other Matt, but actually he's been importing some boosts, and he's been having trouble with them adjusting. And I told him, when you bring them in for 3 or 4 days, use Flourish Advance. And what happens is you are giving them the boosts, and the plants struggle in the process of being shipped, right? So they were in one set of conditions, let's say they were collected from the wild, which many boosts are. They're from the wild. In the wild, they have one set of conditions. Then they get collected and they get put into a holding tank, which God knows what the conditions are like. Then after that, they're collected, they're cleaned, they are put into a bag, and they spend 3 or 4 days being shipped from Indonesia to here, and then they go into your tank. So that's in a course of, let's say, 10 to 15 days, they've gone through 4 different conditions, and they're really struggling. Well, what you do is you give them the Flourish Advance, and they grow roots, and that stabilizes them because it allows them to uptake nutrients, and it forces them to go down a single pathway for a while. And we all know, those of you who garden or who do houseplants, you know that a plant is only as good as its roots, right? So if the roots are strong, the plant is going to do well, ultimately. So when you bring in new plants, it is unless you're bringing them from a very similar condition, so if you're buying them from a local person who's has the same water, very similar kind of keeping style, I always add a little bit of Flourish Advance to try to get them stabilized. So those are kind of the simplest tricks to like the simple plants. And then really it's about growing with the hobby, right? You start with the simple stuff. I think the first plant, because I'll be really honest with you, back when I did saltwater, I had some freshwater tanks and I successfully killed Anubias. I successfully killed, I tried Madagascar lace plant way more times than I should have before I decided that $20 plant was not worth killing anymore. And then, you know, I've killed Val, I've killed hornwort, I've killed moss. I think most of us have done that, right? And really the moment where you start to learn how to really get a sense of a plant is when you start killing it, right? You get to learn what its limits are, where it can do well and where it can't. So yeah, I think those are kind of my initial thoughts. I'm sorry I didn't have a PowerPoint that I planned on doing, but I came home last night at 10 and I packed 300 bags of plants afterwards, and so forgive me. But if anybody has any questions about any specific things that they want.
I've got a 75-gallon tank that has blackbird algae that just will not quit. It just won't quit.
Do you have a lot of driftwood in there?
I used to, I don't anymore.
Okay.
It just kept getting blackbird algae.
Yeah, so especially driftwood that hasn't been properly aged is very commonly seen associated with blackbeard algae because of all the nutrients that are leaching out. Especially I've seen people pull out a piece of driftwood from like one of our creeks around here that's been like half submerged in mud. Like that thing has more nitrogen than like the fertilizers you buy, right? And so it's like it's just leaching out and they're doing really well. I think that the best combat against red algae, so this blackbeard algae and staghorn algae are both red algae, is one of two things. One is really healthy plant growth. So cutting out as much of that algae as you can, especially if you have leaves, like most commonly things like older leaves on Anubias, cut them off. The Anubias doesn't need it. It'll grow new leaves. It's okay. I've done this before and I've cut Anubias all the way down to just the rhizome. It'll grow new leaves. The rhizome is green, the rhizome is photosynthesizing, but that is pretty extreme, right? So it's getting a lot of it out. Clean your filters. So pull out as much mulm, as much guck. Clean your soil. You can't get dirt out of dirt, but there's things you can do like to get like larger pieces, especially if you have like pieces of like, especially if you have like a sword and it has like 3 or 4 dead leaves, do a really good clean. And keep your tank stable. I would say 8 to 10 hours of light is kind of the maximum you want to do if you're fighting algae. You can later on expand it. And if none of that works, I have in the past had people go do like the so-called 1-2 punch for taking care of algae. And so the 1-2 punch, basically you take out your biological media out of your tank. And I would first do a water change, about a 30 to 40% water change, get all that gunk out, clean all of that out. And then so the original method was 6 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water, which I think is quite a lot. There have been some animals that have been burned with that. So I do about 4. So you do 4 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide per gallon. You let it run at the most speed that you can have. So the volume will turn over, put in extra power heads, whatever you have, just really circulate that water. And then after 20 minutes, you do at least a 50 to 75% water change. You get that hydrogen peroxide out, and then you dose a glutaraldehyde product. Like I think you have one of your algae products, right? Oh, I'm sorry?
Yeah, the APT Fix.
Fix, that's right, APT Fix. So, I'm sorry? Yeah, Fix Light, there you go. Be careful if you're doing that if you have Val or if you have Boost. Fix Light's fine? Perfect, okay. But if you use Excel, it will kill off all of your Val. The roots will survive and the crown will survive and they'll come back. But like that can be often counterproductive because you now have like a half a pound of dead val in your aquarium. And you dose it once and then maybe the next day you dose it, and what you'll see is that over course of maybe 2 to 4 days, that algae will start to turn either gray or red or orange, and it'll just all die off. And and I think that's actually a very helpful thing at times. I try not to do it too often, but at times it's helpful because it kind of resets the metabolism and resets the microbiome. And so it gets rid of a bulk of the algae and then lets the plants become dominant again. But you need the plants. So if you only have like one sword in a 75-gallon tank, it's not going to compete, right? Like you need a bunch of plants.
I need to basically do what you said, and then I can see how I need to take my canister filters and rinse them out with old tank water. That's probably what's been causing it. I've got about 4 or 5 big swords in there, some valves, and I think a few Java ferns and some anubias, but mainly swords. And I noticed that the outer leaves, like you said, the old ones,
They shed. Yeah. Pull those out. So as soon as they pull it out, as soon as because it's exactly what Dennis said, the plants abandon old growth, right? Every tree starts off having branches at foot level, but when it's an adult, it's a fully grown tree, it doesn't have branches very low anymore, right? Because those branches are not getting enough light. It doesn't need those branches anymore, so it lets them die. And that's what the sword is doing, and because it's dying, it's leaching out nutrients, the black-bearded algae is attaching itself to it, and so you really want to keep trimming those old leaves out, and that will really help.
do you have any tips and suggestions about when I go to take my canister filter and clean it in the bathtub with the old tank water? Is there any way to get like a really good prime again? Because I always have trouble getting mine primed again.
That is very canister specific. I don't do a lot of canister filters. I have Oase is the only ones that I have. And I like those because they're easy to, part of it is because they're easy to prime, especially some of the older ones that we had, back in the 90s. I've had a couple of those and like, my God, getting those started again is just such a pain in the butt. But what I will say is that I don't think that, so I will say I've kept tanks for 30 plus years. I have never washed my media in old tank water. I use tap water. And that there's actually some really good data. Yeah. So there's actually really good data on how long nitrifying bacteria can survive when exposed to 5 parts per million of chloramine, which is what we have. And if you have free floating, when they're in their transitionary state, they'll survive like 2 seconds. But once they're attached to the filter media, they are in a biofilm. And biofilm is evolutionarily designed to protect it from things killing it. And if you keep it for 5 minutes in 5 parts per million, you will lose 5% of your nitrifying bacteria, which is dwarfed by the amount of food that you reduce when you just remove all the mulm, right? And they double about every 24 hours. So even if you killed half of them, they're back the next day. And you're not going to kill half of them. The real thing is don't wash it with soap, don't bleach it, don't hydrogen peroxide it, don't soak it in tap water for like 3 hours, but like rinse it, squeeze it out, don't worry about it. Any other questions?
Like what nutrients do you use for your plants? Like what brand do you use?
Okay, so I mix my own. I mix my own from powders. But whenever people tell me I don't want to mix my own, which is fair, because not everybody wants to have a little chemistry set in their basement, I always most strongly recommend the APT brand. And that's not because Dennis is here. If you go back on band, you will see me railing against other fertilizers that I hate, especially Easy Green, because Easy Green is otherwise known as Easy Green Algae. I actually have a bottle of Easy Green because I've never seen anything that grows, in our tap water at least, anything that grows green water better than Easy Green. So I use it for my green water cultures. Like I do not know what their recipe is, but it's spectacular. spectacular for it. And my favorite thing about it, because I've been saying that for a long time, and then I think about a year ago, he posted a video about him like dosing all of his tanks. And then he posted a video like 2 weeks later, and all of his tanks are just like covered in algae. And he's like, I had a setback. I'm like, I know why you had that setback, because a lot of your customers have had the exact same setback. So like that, I think that's my one. And the other fertilizer that I like that's a little more work intensive, so if you don't want to do it, don't do it, is from Greg Sage from Select Aquatics. He'll sell you like a fertilizer that's derived from a hydroponics fertilizer. That one's designed for low-tech, high fish load tanks. And so it's a little bit different. It's powder, and like he'll tell you like mix this much with this much, and that one's, I like that one a lot.
If you want to mix your own, my website has instructions for you as well.
Yep, there you go.
I'm very pro people doing their own DIY.
Yeah, DIY is
Things for a calculator, you can use the calculator source for you. It's just labor intensive.
And if you want to ever lose like 200 hours of your life and learn a lot about plants, APT website. There's really not a single bad article I've read there. Melanie?
Do you find a difference for, not obviously the more complicated or complex plants, but just when you're like average plants that most people use, do you find a difference as far as using RO water or tap water, like the fertilizing with RO versus the tap?
All of my high-tech tanks are in tap water. Our tap water here is not that bad, right? It's relatively high calcium, but it's actually a relatively low KH. It's like 4 or 5. So that's not bad. It's not the 2 that'll get you growing everything, but it's pretty good. The only thing that's an issue with our water is the way they process it. To flocculate the mud out, the pH out of the tap will come out at like 9.6, and then it'll drop to like 6.8 over 24 hours. So if you can age it for 24 hours, I think that's good. But to be honest with you, most of my tanks I just do straight tap water changes even without aging, and they do fine. They do fine. I only use RO for my tanks where I have Cardinia shrimp. And that's the only reason I'm doing it, is for the Cardinia. And I have not had trouble growing it. There's a few things I've had a little bit of struggle with growing, as in like they're not reproducing like crazy, but they're surviving. So, you know, things like blood vomit. Yeah.
So the whole internet uses the super soft water just to grow that 1%.
Exactly. And if you want that 1%, then yeah, you should probably you can have like one tank with RO water that'll grow that 1%. And it's part of what I was talking about earlier. Like, you don't want all of your tanks to be super soft water and high tech. If you, like, for example, like me, you want to grow a bunch of like the easy plants too, because then you'll be trying to grow that really hard plant right here, and there's hornwort right there, and it's just going to shade it over in like 5 minutes. All right, I think I'm at the end of my time. Thank you.
That's me. And Mavis gave me the name Banana Jones. And this is just the stock for my larger speeches, of which this is not one. All right, so we're going to talk about aquarium microfauna. That's a bladder snail up close. You can see it has a much more attractive shell than we used to seeing it, such a small size. I grow a ton of these purposely in a tank because I throw them in as turtle food for all the turtles, and they pick them off one by one. Microfauna is actually becoming a lot more popular now to keep some of the things because of the size, and we get all these small rimless tanks, really pretty. So you can set up just a couple of plants and have some sort of invertebrate a lot easier than you can keep fish, especially in a no filtration or low filtration environment. Coming up in the darter, we have a gentleman that's going to be writing for us, and he specializes in water, which I'll talk about in a second. So, first of all, what is a crustacean? Those are crustaceans, including the roly-poly. And they're arthropods, so they have a segmented body, and exoskeleton is made of chitin. And there's been about 70,000 species. So a lot of the aquarium critters that we get fall into this general category, which is why I'm putting up the categories. What's that? Anybody know? Scud, indeed. Do you know which species? No, no one does. So that's a freshwater amphipod, also known as a scud. This one is the most common one that you see in the aquarium trade in this part of the country. Gammarus pulex. We also get at least 3 or 4 other species that I've seen before, but I am not enough of an expert to name them. Why? All right. All right. Okay, so they're mostly detritivores and scavengers. So they're going to live at the bottom of your tank, and they're going to swim around your tank, and they're going to eat mostly dead stuff. They will eat some living stuff, and there's a huge debate about whether or not they take out baby shrimp. Do they eat them? Do they mate with them to death? A distinct possibility that at least one researcher thinks is what happens. So I don't keep them in any setup that has shrimp or I plan to breed shrimp, but I do have a separate setup with just Gammarus. If I'm gonna keep cichlids or something like that, I have something that would feed. It's an excellent feed because it'll live in the aquarium, it doesn't die, and so it doesn't stink up your water. There's about 10,000 species of these all around the world. And amphipod, it means different feet because they have several different kinds of feet. So they have swimming legs, they have a digging leg, climbing, walking. And anyway, that's a little bit of trivia about the legs. Who knows what this is? Anyone?
Alien spacecraft?
Yes, that is exactly. I took this in my backyard. Now, this is what? It's an ostracod. This is a seed shrimp. And this is the more common one that you're going to see in your tanks. You might see it looks brown, and then you get up close and you see it actually has some coloration to it. So it's another class of crustaceans, a whole group, and they are designed like little clams. So they do a little bit of this number. There's 33,000 species. I forgot a T there. And they have that bivalve shell. And basically, you're going to feed on detritus again. You're going to feed on bacteria. I tend to get them in high nutrient tanks where I have a lot of mulm and I have a lot of stuff like that. So, boom. They can reproduce asexually, so you really can just sort of get them cloning in a tank. So if you put them in a tank, so that's how you end up getting them. I love them. I harvest them from my pond and put them in tanks and stuff like that because they're great extra food for some critters, although not everything will eat it. Okay. Any guesses? No. But, yeah, I mean, you're thinking along the right lines. But no, this is actually tiny. This is an aquatic isopod. Isopods is just a general term that we give for a whole class of little critters, that some of which roll up and some of which don't. These are more like the wood lice. These are more like the ones that don't roll. They scamper along. This is becoming super popular as an aquarium specimen on its own in certain parts of the world where they're building micro tanks, sub 1 gallon tanks with just a few of these, and they'll breed with almost nothing. Just give them some leaf litter, maybe a little food every once in a while. I like to aerate. I have 2 setups with just these. Aquatic isopods, and there's about 130 some in North America, and we have at least 7 or 8 species in Missouri. These ones are wonderful. They don't eat shrimp babies or anything, and keep this with absolutely everything. This is my favorite thing to put with my turtles. They get into every little crevice and eat all the stuff. So the females, just a little bit of trivia, have a cool little pouch that they put their little eggs in called a marsupium. So usually when you get these in your tank, if you get these accidentally in your tank, it was an adult. You did not get eggs. You know what I'm saying? So that you're not usually going to see, because the females carry those to the last possible minute. So it's not one of the critters that comes in accidentally on plants. It's one of the ones that you get a full-on adult, and then and honestly, they don't show up as much as I wish they would accidentally in aquariums, because I would love if more people were like, I got an aquatic isopod, and I could identify it, but it doesn't happen. All right, annelids. Another group of animals that we see a lot of in aquaria and in our terraria and stuff like that are the annelids. They're invertebrates, and the annelid group is specifically the worms that have segments. So there's tons of species, 20,000 around the world, and they're in every habitat. You see, that's a leech. That's you might know, that's like a red wiggler, and then over there's a marine worm, and then that is a really big worm there. They get super big, and well, that one does. Anyway, they're totally common in almost every environment, and there's lots that live in the water. David Farrell, who's out there selling some live foods and stuff, he's cultivating an extremely tiny, fully aquatic worm that would maybe be a substitute for the smallest feeder worms, except this thing won't die when you put it into the water because it lives there fully. So maybe you could just populate the tank and an extra random food source for anything aggressive enough to look for it. So that might be some part of the future. How about that? Do you recognize that one? Anyone? No, of course not. Why would you? This is a detritus worm, Naiadae. So detritus worms show up when your tank has plenty of junk. It's got mulm, it's got waste and stuff like that. You're gonna see them. Your tank probably has them, whether or not you have a lot of junk. But the population doesn't explode. It's only when the population explodes, and it's actually really becomes noticeable when the tank bottom gets so filled with stuff that they start to emerge to get oxygen. And once you see that, they'll wave around like little seas of eels. So I had a tank that I just only used to house plants that I brought in from the pond that I floated. And I left it there. I put no fish in it or anything like that. And it was just a million of these, like a Frank Herbert Dune nightmare every day, but really cool. And whatever will eat them will, do tend to like them. So tubifex, that's a food that we make from some of the tubifacid worms and is sold as a fish food. Again, not harmful to your tank, but can be indicative of parameters that you might want to address for the health of other animals, or just oh, I got too much mold buildup. Maybe I do need to clean. What is a hexapod? All right, so used to be all hexapods were just called insects, but now we put them into 2 different groups. So all insects are hexapods, but not all hexapods are insects. And the name means 6 legs, and they are 6-legged little critters. Those 2 tiny soil organisms are not technically insects, but they are hexapods. That's an insect and a hexapod and a giant. The weta is, that's New Zealand, one of their national animals, a point of pride. Massive, massive cricket. Okay. What's that? Anyone? No, but it looks like it. What now?
Caligula springtail.
Yep. Boom! This is an aquatic springtail. Padura aquatica in the Columbola group. It's a hexapod, but not an insect, which is why you get it. All right, so there's actually quite a few species. Most of the time when we get them here in Missouri, they're gonna show up on your floating plants, duckweed, whatever, and they're gonna be this species. Almost all the species can submerge in the water by trapping air around their bodies and essentially scuba diving down to protect themselves. So that's why when you try to drown them, it doesn't work because they just pop back up a little later and they're really fine.
Are those rolling polies, what you would call rolling polies?
No, these are like, yeah.
Smaller than an aphid.
Yeah, the analog for these are the terrestrial springtails. So if you were to pull up a handful of dirt anywhere, you would see many tiny little white to pink insects roving around there. They form one of the base layers of the soil ecosystem. This is like that for the aquatic environment, just a very small, tiny creature. Usually they just look like dots. You just see them as like dots on a plant. I really like them, and I don't take any effort to kill them. They only eat the dead, decayed plant matter, so they're not feeding on your live plants. So in general, I don't worry about them. And they are really cute close up. They don't look like anything when you see them on your plant. They just look like a little speck. But if you have a microscope and you look at them, they kind of have this little like honeypot segmented. I have several terrestrial springtails in this same group that I keep. One is bright red, one is bright yellow, and they look like that too. But nobody keeps Padura on purpose. They just show up. So, all right. How about this? Terrible, besides being a terrible picture. I will accept that answer. Anyone? Aphid. 'Tis the aphid, the dreaded water lily aphid. That's a bunch of water lily aphids. It's a hexapod, but this one is an insect. And they do attack aquatic plants, and they will eat your live plants and tear them up as much as possible. So this is probably the worst pest for those of us who grow immersed plants. They have a really complex life cycle that includes two different forms to their bodies. One part of the year, they're living outdoors. They're not attacking water plants because they're feeding on the newly emerged vegetation on trees. They spend the other part of the year growing massively large by attacking all of these super easy to eat aquatic leaves after the new shoots on the trees have hardened off and there's no longer possible to eat. Then they go back from this form to the trees, nestle in those crevices, and the next season comes around. So you get them at a certain time of year, you know? And then in the winter, for us, I grow a ton of lilies. So I have them growing inside at all times. So like this year, a bunch of Mexican lilies inside, you know, as soon as everything's shut down and the weather outside is too bad and everything, and I got my room going and the heat's up, they show up. And Andre struggles with them. Anything that sits at the top of the water long enough, if I'm not doing something about it, will end up like this. Now, a lot of people talk about, you know, swipe them off, let your fish eat them. But they float and they also trap water on their bodies. They're designed to, you know, fall in the water and get right back out. So they climb out really fast and they can stay underwater for quite a while. So, recent strategy that I've had was to install a misting system above my, it was a pretty simple thing, just a tank of water with some nozzles, and I put that above my lilies. So it blasts them with water at least twice a day and just washes everything off, and then I don't have to do the dunk. And the leaves are staying a little bit better now. It is just really a problem. There's not too much you can do about it. Okay. And That's it for me. Subscribe to the Darter. Just informational. So does anybody have any questions?
I saw some leeches at the aquarium shop. Are all leeches parasitic or some of them benign?
Okay, well, all leeches are parasitic to some degree. Yeah, I mean, all leeches will feed on that kind of material. You don't really get leeches that don't feed off of a larger organism, so that's sort of their thing.
No, it was in the aquarium shop.
Yeah, they're cool. I mean, leeches are cool, and they will eat other stuff. So, I mean, you don't have to feed them blood or, living animal tissue. But yeah, they're kind of popular in a few places. There's some really, really colorful ones. So they can be, kind of a neat, different, weird pet. Yeah. Mm-hmm, yeah. Yeah, they did the medical leeches. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Debridement is not as popular here as it is elsewhere, but yeah, stripping off the tissue before it putrefies, as it putrefies, before it becomes infectious is a really important thing. Yeah, oh, it works very well. It works very well. Yeah, they're only going to eat the tissues that, I mean, it's hard for us to get over it. A lot of times they sedate patients when they're doing this, cover the whole area, play some Enya in the background or whatever they have to do to get their mind off of it. But it is really clean, super sustainable, and really good for wounds. Who else? No one? Yes.
I mostly use drip tanks. Now I've had issues with Hydra.
Hydra, yeah.
Yeah. Do you know any methods to get rid of Hydra without getting rid of the shrimp?
Yeah, I mean, there are some Hydra, medications that people use that I believe are shrimp safe. But I don't know. I don't usually have tanks with just shrimp that I would have to treat Hydra in. And usually I have enough fish that my Hydra never gets to be out of control. But I think there's a product called No Hydra that we sell at Art of Aquaria. And I could not. I mean, I work at one place one day a week, but I couldn't. It wasn't, the name was just like, No planaria they have, and there's a No Hydra one too that takes care of the Hydra.
But I've heard that multiple uses in the same tank can be detrimental to shrimp. I've noticed that they slow down after multiple uses.
Well, has anyone found that? Does anybody know about that? Yeah. Hydrogen peroxide will do it. Yeah, but that's the general. That's what a lot of people do. What now? Flubendazole? Flubendazole? I've never used flubendazole for Hydra. That'll kill them. Just throw the tank away. You get Hydra, and the only thing to do is throw the tank away, the whole tank. Just take it out and throw it, burn it all, start again. It's the only thing to do. Yes, sir.
Do you have any preferred, easy methods for propagating them for fever?
Oh, for propagating which one? Scuds?
Any particular one that you would recommend as a starter one?
Well, if you have stuff that will eat scuds are super easy to breed. But my technique is to get a bunch of secondhand meaning coming out of tanks that I already have, mostly eroded plant material, detritus, and then I throw that to the bottom of a tub that I only aerate. And then I just let them go crazy. I put in a bunch of other leaf litter and stuff like that, and then I throw in hornwort. Hornwort, just hornwort. I mean, it grows well enough. I have used Najas in the past, or guppy grass, but it it breaks up so much, and the hornwort will break up too, but it tends to be a little stiffer. So the reason I like that is because when I'm going to harvest, I want to pull out the mass of hornwort, and then get a net in there and dig it out, and you get a lump of detritus with the scuds in it. And then I pour them, and then I rinse out the net, and I'm left with just a mass of scuds. And you do that very slowly, and then I throw them into the tanks. So, zucchini. Yeah, they'll eat anything, which is really great. I mean, it's pretty tough to kill them off. I mean, if you have anything in the tank, unless the tank's completely barren of nutrients, they'll pretty much suck up anything they can, anything that's available. So, the aquatic isopods are a little bit tougher. They should be easy, but people crash them all the time. My propagation method for those is a rock pile that goes up to one corner of the tank. And I basically just, sand first, right? So I'm not tossing rocks in, and then pile up some stones. Larger ones and then smaller ones as it comes down. And then I throw leaf litter in on that. Usually some plants so it looks pretty. But the plants are not essential, right? And the leaf litter decomposes and they eat that. And when I go to harvest, I lift stones and they'll be like on the rock. And then I just shake them off into my container. So that's made harvesting easier for me. I don't feed them to anything. I seed all the turtle tanks about a week before any fish or turtle goes in there. And I just say shake off like 30 or 40 of them in there if I can. And then they go infiltrate all the little crevices in the turtle hides and the caves. And then after that I add the neocaridina, and then I add fish. So that's the whole progression there. I'm a big believer in the add your predatory animals last. So like, say you wanted to do a betta tank and you wanted a betta community tank. Get everything for your community tank except the betta. And add all of that and have it living in the tank and then add the betta. Animals just generally, and this is true of turtles, it's also true of a lot of animals, that when they're added to an environment, the things that are already in that environment just become part of the accepted background of the environment. New things that are introduced are given a lot more attention. So if you're dealing with a betta that you don't want, when you're adding your neons after your betta's established, now those neons are appearing in the betta's home. So it's more likely to go up and nip them. And the same thing is true with the turtles. And that's why I do all those introductions in that order. So I eventually am getting to the keystone animal of my fake ecosystem. Final slide. All right, so. Yeah, I accept anything. Any other questions?
The springtails, do they hop around?
Yeah, they do jump.
Okay, so that is what I have. I've had those pop up in my tank, and I was worried at first. I've had them for a while now. But my first thought was, how did I get tiny fleas in my tank?
Yeah, they do look like fleas, because bing, bing. So all the columbola have a cool device. They basically have a thing called a furcula, which is like a fork at the back, and it's that allows them to jump. It goes boom, and they spring off and stuff like that. So it's actually pretty cool because they exist in so many different environments that it's really neat to see that it actually works on water as well with the Pedura and the different kinds of springtails. Springtails is another big hobby that has expanded recently, and I am, I have several species that I keep, but it's why? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me at all. Because you look in the box and there is nothing in there. I mean, you're literally, to enjoy it, you have to just be like, yeah, and then you put the leaf, there's no observing them. So it's a boring hobby, but I still like especially if you're like a person who's into microscopy. I have like a stereoscope. So little things like that are kind of fun for me because I can put them on the slide and check them out. But if you don't have that kind of thing, they're a little boring. Springtails will also make a feed for animals, for fish that top feed pretty aggressively. So I found that I get a lot of rice fish eating them, and I get a lot of killifish type stuff like that. We'll eat them.
Do you do riparians?
Yeah.
I've seen some that are just amazing. They look like the woods.
Those are probably not mine.
Add in more bugs in it.
Yeah, I mean, I do a bunch of, I specialize in paludariums, I'd say, for what I build. So because of the turtles, I do like a water area, and then I build up to a land area. Turtles need to dry out completely, so it's important to give them an area where they could be as dry as they wanted to, and that's promoting shell health. And then you have to put a heat lamp in that area. So lately I've been experimenting with doing carved foam backgrounds, basically. So I take the hobby foam, stack it up, carve it with a hot knife thing, and that's been kind of cool because what it allows me to do is at the top I can then carve it out, hollow it, and just fill it with soil, and I have like a top planter. So now I have my 125 tank is growing a bunch of strawberries. And interestingly enough, the strawberry shot over the side, right, and hit the water and has now gone underwater all the way to the other. I mean, it's just an idiot. It can't find its way back up, but it's like in the leaf litter. It's still alive. I don't know why. I'm waiting. I'm going to let it die to study it. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love the full ecosystem builds. I mean, it's really fun to try to mess with it. Few of us have enough space. Yeah, few of us have enough space to do anything really big. My most intense setup is a indoor pond area that has enough land that I can get a nice land ecosystem. So there I have springtails, isopods, but also you remember the amphipod I was talking about? The scud, right? So there is a land scud, essentially, a terrestrial amphipod. And they call them lawn shrimp where they appear. They need a really specific moisture gradient. So if it's too dry, they die off. Too wet, they die off. But they also go through the soil, and they produce the fluffiest, lightest soil ever of anything that I have. Their compost is really pretty cool. So I add those too. They are interesting because they will eat a lot of meat stuff if it's there. So any dying animal, they just eat it up. You'll never see them. But you take up, you pull up something and they jump around. So those are pretty cool. I mean, I think those are something that not a lot of people keep, but I think it's a really good addition to bioactive enclosures. But again, it's hard to have enough space to have enough terrestrial and aquatic that you could do an ecosystem in both. So. Sherpa designs are really engineeringly awesome and beautiful, but they're not meant to survive. I mean, he puts Boston ferns with their roots in the water. And that's not going to last long. It's just not. I mean, I've seen people try to do it a bunch of times. Those are display tanks primarily, and so maybe 6 months. And they're really cool, but you're crowding stuff in there. So it really depends on how often you want to set it up. For me, if I'm keeping reptiles and stuff, I want my setups to last a lot longer than that because it's a pain to move them and stuff like that. But, he also has to create content. So, he's got to keep breaking down tanks to make new tanks so that he can keep providing new content. There's nothing wrong with what he does. And engineering-wise, genius. Some of the solutions he comes up with for how to build those tanks are great. And his design skills are pretty good. I mean, he's got a nice understanding of how we aesthetically appreciate things. But a lot of those paludarium setups, people come to me because they know I do paludariums. They ask me to say, well, he's got this in the water. I'm like, no, that's dead. Don't put that in the water. It's just, those things would last. They just won't last very long. Right now, in the aquarium trade, because I work at the store whose name I can't remember, they sell mondo grass, right, as an aquarium plant. So you'll get a lot of people selling it. That's not going to survive long-term aquatic, right? But it will survive a long time aquatic, So, you know what I'm saying? So some of these things are sort of like products. And, the internet is such a wonderful trove of information, but it can also be somewhat misleading because the content is a product. The tank might not be sustainable. The idea might not be sustainable. I've seen setups for reptiles online where I'm like, yeah, beautiful. Maybe a month you got, maybe 2 months. You don't have enough room in there to, but it'll look amazing. Like, oh my God, it's a jungle. But like, for instance, there was a paludarium I saw with a caiman lizard. So caiman lizards are absolutely immense. And when I was watching it with my wife was like, oh my God, it's like it's in the jungle. And I was like, yeah, but you see how shallow the water is there. The main problem with that is that lizard's waste is going to build up so fast that water is just going to be absolutely disgusting. You can plunge it out as much as you want, but it's still going to be toxic. It's not enough volume for that caiman lizard to, to have a good skin condition and stuff like that over time. So, so it does create a little bit of a problem when we're creating products out of building these beautiful setups, because it can promote ideas that aren't really sustainable and aren't going to function, say, years down the line.
It's the same problem for the aquarium.
Exactly. It's the same exact problem. You see the aquascapes on there and you're like, that's not going to work, that's not going to work. But they will work for that day and the week, or at a show. They would work at Aquashella. You could take that tank to Aquashella and set it up and it looked beautiful the whole show. But maybe not later on. So that's why it's nice to have local resources. Pet stores, but also clubs like this form a really important function. And aquarium magazines form a really important function. I was just talking to the editor of Amazonas who's here today, and it's like, we're vetting some of this and also talking, trying to find the experts. So other than selling the content, you're just trying to offer the resources that you can go back to again and again and again. Whereas if you're doing something like Serpa Squad or you just have to keep pumping it out. You have to keep pumping out new stuff. That being said, there's a great YouTube called Biotope Gallery. You guys know Biotope Galleries out of South Korea? Check that out. It's really awesome. He builds these amazing carnivorous plant, setups, and they're gorgeous. And he's got that engineering knowledge to I'm going to do the drain like this, and it's going to go from here to here, and it's going to have biofiltration here, and you're like, amazing. There's no talking in his videos, but they're hypnotizing. All right. Anything else? Fine. Good night.